It happened a few years back when I decided to take a solo road trip and stumbled upon this creaky old motel in the middle of nowhere. Little did I know, that night would become etched in the shadows of my memory. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I pulled into the parking lot of the Moonlight Motel. It looked straight out of a horror flick, with faded neon lights and a flickering vacancy sign. The kind of place you'd only find in the forgotten stretches of the map. I headed inside to the flickering buzz of a fluorescent light, the ding of the rusty bell announcing my arrival. The old guy behind the counter, George, I think his name was, gave me a toothless grin as he handed over a brass key with a worn-out tag that read Room 13. I chuckled at the cliché, thinking it was all in good fun. The motel had that distinct musty smell, like time had forgotten to air the place out. The narrow hallway led me to my room, and as I unlocked the door, a chill ran down my spine. The air inside felt heavy, like a weight pressing against my chest. I shrugged it off, blaming it on the worn-out carpet and dated decor. The room itself was something out of the 70s, floral wallpaper peeling at the edges, and a moth-eaten armchair in the corner. I tossed my bags on the bed and decided to explore the town. Little did I know, that night would be the beginning of a haunting melody. As I wandered through the eerily quiet streets, I stumbled upon an old record store. The place looked abandoned, but the creaky door swung open with a spine-chilling screech as I pushed it. Dust-covered vinyl records lined the shelves, relics of a time long gone. Something about the place drew me in, and I found myself sifting through the forgotten tunes. The owner, an old man with a hunchback, emerged from the shadows. He had this eerie vibe, like he knew something you didn't. Without saying a word, he handed me a vinyl, his wrinkled fingers tracing the words Room 13 on the cover. The cover art depicted an old motel, the same as the one I was staying in. Intrigued, I decided to buy it, thinking it'd make for a quirky souvenir. Little did I know, that record would become the haunting melody of the night. As I returned to Room 13, the air felt denser, the silence more pronounced. I placed the record on the dusty turntable, and the needle crackled to life. A haunting melody filled the room, a mix of mournful strings and distant whispers. It sent shivers down my spine, but there was a strange beauty to it. As the last note echoed, a sudden chill enveloped the room. The lights flickered, and a shadowy figure appeared in the corner. It had no distinct features, just a silhouette against the dim glow. Panic set in as the figure seemed to sway with the haunting melody, its movements synchronized with the ghostly notes. "Who are you?" I stammered, my voice barely audible over the haunting tune. The figure didn't respond. It just continued its spectral dance. Fear gripped me as I fumbled to turn off the record player, the melody now a twisted symphony in my ears. I bolted out of the room, slamming the door behind me. The corridor was now eerily quiet, the motel seemingly frozen in time. I stumbled down the hallway, heart pounding, until I reached the front desk. George was gone, the reception deserted. I called out, but my voice echoed through the empty lobby. It felt like the motel had swallowed me whole, and I was trapped in a nightmare. Determined to escape the surreal nightmare, I sprinted to my car. As the engine roared to life, I glanced back at the motel. Room 13's window flickered with a dim light, the haunting melody still lingering in the air. I sped away, leaving the Moonlight Motel in the rearview mirror. The town vanished in the darkness, and as the haunting melody faded, I couldn't shake the feeling that Room 13 held secrets beyond the reach of reality. To this day, that haunting melody lingers in my dreams, a spectral reminder of a night when the line between the living and the unknown blurred into a surreal symphony. Room 13 and its ghostly dance became a chapter in my life, a tale I share cautiously, for fear that the haunting melody might still find its way into the silence of the night. It was an ordinary summer, the kind where the air is thick with the promise of adventures, and the sunsets linger in hues of orange and pink. But beneath the surface of my seemingly mundane life, a tale unfolded that still sends shivers down my spine. I was staying with my grandparents in their old farmhouse. It stood surrounded by fields that whispered in the breeze, a backdrop to countless childhood memories. This summer, however, held something different, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. One evening, as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the fields, my grandma beckoned me into the attic. "There's something I want to show you, dear," she said, her eyes holding a mix of nostalgia and sadness. The attic, with its dusty relics of the past, felt like a treasure trove of forgotten stories. Among the worn-out furniture and moth-eaten clothes, my grandma uncovered an old photo album. Pages yellowed with time revealed a family I barely recognized, relatives whose names had faded into obscurity. As she turned the pages, a picture caught my eye. A young girl with hauntingly familiar eyes, staring at the camera with a hint of melancholy. "Who's this, Grandma?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She sighed, a heavy exhale filled with the weight of untold stories. "That's Lily, your aunt. She was my sister's child, but she vanished when she was just a little thing. No one ever found out what happened." The revelation sent a chill down my spine. Lily's eyes seemed to follow me, as if imploring me to uncover the mystery of her disappearance. Grandma's voice trembled as she continued. She used to play in the fields for hours, lost in her own little world. Then one day, she just vanished without a trace. That night, I lay in bed, the image of Lily's face etched into my mind. Sleep eluded me as the wind whispered through the open window, carrying with it an eerie lullaby. It felt like the fields held a secret, and Lily was waiting for someone to uncover it. The following days, I found myself drawn to the fields, the tall grass brushing against my legs as I ventured deeper. The air felt charged with an energy I couldn't explain. One afternoon, as the sun hung low, casting long shadows just like in the old photograph, I heard a faint laughter, a child's laughter. My heart raced as I followed the sound, weaving through the maze of golden fields. And there, standing in a patch of sunlight, was Lily, a spectral figure bathed in a warm glow. "You came," she said, her voice a whisper carried by the wind. I stumbled backward, my mind grappling with the impossibility of the scene before me. "Lily, is it really you?" I stammered, my voice quivering. She nodded, a sad smile playing on her lips. "I've been waiting for someone to find me. It's so lonely here." Questions tumbled from my lips as Lily recounted the day she disappeared, a day lost in the folds of time. She had followed the melody of a distant song, a tune only she could hear. The fields had swallowed her whole, and she found herself in a world between worlds, a place forgotten by time. "I never grew up. I'm stuck in the memories of that day," Lily explained, her eyes holding a sadness that transcended the years. I watched the world change, but I remained frozen. Determination ignited within me. I couldn't leave Lily trapped in the limbo of the fields. Together, we retraced her steps, following the echo of the long-forgotten melody. As we reached the heart of the fields, a soft glow enveloped us, and Lily's form seemed to shimmer. "I can feel it," she whispered. "It's time to move on." And just like that, with the last strains of the haunting melody, Lily faded away, leaving behind only the rustling leaves and the golden fields. When I returned to the farmhouse, I found my grandma in the attic, staring at the old photograph. Her eyes were filled with a mix of sorrow and relief. "She's gone, isn't she?" she said, more a statement than a question. I nodded, unable to find words. Lily was finally free, her spirit released from the grip of the fields. Grandma placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of the bond we now shared, a connection forged by the mystery that had haunted our family for years. As the summer days unfolded, the farmhouse seemed to sigh with a newfound peace. The fields, once a silent witness to a forgotten tale, now whispered with the breeze, carrying Lily's laughter into the open air. And so, the ordinary summer became extraordinary, a chapter in the family history rewritten by the winds of change. The haunting melody that once lingered in the shadows had found its resolution, leaving behind a legacy of healing and closure. Lily's spirit, freed from the timeless fields, had become a gentle breeze, a guardian of the golden memories that now danced in the sunlight. In the quiet town of Ravensbrook, where time seemed to move at its own pace, I stumbled upon an old antique shop tucked away between forgotten storefronts. The doorbell jingled softly as I entered, greeted by the musty scent of aged wood and hidden histories. Among dusty trinkets and tarnished treasures, my eyes fixated on a peculiar full-length mirror at the back of the shop. The frame, adorned with intricate carvings, seemed to whisper forgotten secrets. The shopkeeper, a weathered man with sunken eyes, noticed my fascination. "That mirror has a tale of its own, young one," he said, his voice carrying the weight of untold stories. "It's said to hold reflections from beyond." Intrigued, I purchased the mirror, its cool surface sending a shiver through my fingertips. Little did I know, this antique piece would unravel a haunting chapter in my life. That night, as the moon hung low, I positioned the mirror in my bedroom. Its presence seemed to alter the ambience, casting an ethereal glow across the walls. Intricate patterns adorned the frame, like whispers etched in wood. As I gazed into the mirror, my reflection stared back, but its eyes held a depth I couldn't fathom. It was as if the glass harbored a silent watcher, a specter lingering just beyond my perception. Unease settled in, but curiosity outweighed caution. One evening, as the town embraced the quietude of twilight, I noticed something peculiar in the mirror, a subtle movement, a shadowy figure in the periphery. I turned, but nothing greeted me except the stillness of my room. "I must be seeing things," I muttered to myself, dismissing the uneasy feeling that crept up my spine. Yet the mirror seemed to hold a secret, and its whispers lingered in the air like a haunting melody. One midnight, unable to resist the mirror's pull, I whispered a question into the quiet room. "Who are you?" The answer didn't come in words, but in a subtle ripple, a distortion in the reflection, as if the glass itself held the weight of 1,000 untold stories. Determined to unravel the mystery, I delved into the history of Ravensbrook. The town's archives spoke of a tragic incident, a fire that claimed an entire block decades ago. Among the lost souls was a young woman named Eliza, her life snuffed out before its time. The pieces began to align. The mirror, a relic from a bygone era, seemed to carry echoes of Eliza's essence. The carvings on the frame, once ornate, now mirrored the delicate patterns of her era. I was entangled in a spectral dance with the past. One night, as the clock ticked towards the witching hour, I dared to ask, "Eliza, is that you?" The room held its breath as the mirror shimmered with an ethereal glow. A soft whisper, like a breeze through forgotten corridors, replied, "Yes." As the connection deepened, the mirror's whispers evolved into vivid visions. I glimpsed Eliza's life, a time of elegance and tragedy. Her laughter echoed in the background as the mirror unfolded the tapestry of her existence. But with each passing night, the room seemed to grow colder, the mirror's glow dimming. Eliza's whispers turned melancholic, and her spectral figure appeared weary. I sensed a lingering pain, a longing that transcended the boundaries of the supernatural. One fateful night, as the mirror's whispers reached a crescendo, Eliza's figure wavered, and her voice, a soft lament, filled the room. "Release me," she implored, the words carrying the weight of a century-long plea. A surge of empathy overwhelmed me, and I understood. The mirror, a conduit between worlds, held Eliza captive. Determined to free her from the spectral chains, I sought guidance from an elderly town historian. "You've awakened a lost spirit," he said, his eyes reflecting a mixture of awe and concern. "To release her, you must sever the connection." With trepidation, I dismantled the mirror from its place in my room. The carvings, once intricate, now felt like a map of Eliza's sorrow. As I removed the last piece, a soft wind enveloped the room, and Elisa's figure flickered, like a candle on the verge of extinguishing. "I'll never forget you," I whispered, a tear tracing a path down my cheek. And with that, the mirror, now an artifact of the past, became dormant. As dawn painted the sky in hues of rose and gold, Ravensbrück embraced a newfound tranquility. The mirror, stripped of its spectral burden, became a mere reflection of the room. The town resumed its quiet existence, unaware of the otherworldly tale that unfolded within its midst. The antique shop continued to stand, its doorbell jingling softly as visitors entered, oblivious to the mirror's whispers that once echoed through the night. Once, in the middle of autumn, I found myself drawn to the outskirts of a forgotten town, lured by the promise of adventure. The landscape transformed into a sea of crimson and gold as I ventured deeper into the woods that locals spoke of in hushed tones, the Whispering Woods. The air was thick with the scent of fallen leaves and an eerie stillness that clung to the tall, skeletal trees. As I walked, the forest seemed to close in, casting elongated shadows that danced on the leaf-strewn ground. A sense of foreboding settled over me, yet curiosity propelled me forward. Amidst the rustling leaves, I heard soft whispers, a symphony of voices carried by the wind. It was as if the very woods were alive, murmuring secrets that only the brave or the foolhardy dared to decipher. Ignoring the nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach, I pressed on. The whispers grew louder, forming words that echoed through the crisp air. "Come closer," they beckoned, a collective murmur that seemed to resonate from the heart of the woods. Intrigued and unnerved, I followed the haunting invitation, guided by an invisible force. As I ventured deeper, the trees closed in like silent sentinels, their gnarled branches forming a natural canopy. The whispers transformed into fragmented sentences, chilling narrative of lost souls and forgotten tales. A sense of being watched hung in the air, and an unspoken tension gripped the woods. In the midst of the labyrinthine paths, I stumbled upon an ancient well, a relic from a time long past. The whispers converged, forming a coherent voice that resonated from the depths. "Release us," it implored, the words wrapping around my senses like a spectral embrace. Driven by an inexplicable compulsion, I peered into the well. The water, murky and reflective, held secrets that seemed to ripple to the surface. Faces emerged, their expressions a tapestry of anguish and longing. It was as if the well harbored the trapped spirits of a forgotten era. "What happened here?" I questioned, the words escaping my lips almost involuntarily. The whispers intensified, recounting a tragic tale of a village lost to time, swallowed by the very woods that now whispered their sorrows. In that moment, the atmosphere shifted, and the woods seemed to come alive with a spectral energy. Shadows moved between the trees, and a cold wind carried echoes of distant laughter and weeping. The past pulled into the present, and I found myself entangled in a narrative woven by the very fabric of the Whispering Woods. As the voices crescendoed, a figure materialized, a spectral guardian with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce my soul. "Release us," it echoed, its ethereal form a reflection of the trapped spirits. I felt the weight of their sorrow, an empathetic connection that transcended the boundaries of the living. Driven by a sense of responsibility, I sought a way to free the spirits. The whispers guided me to an ancient ritual, a ceremony of remembrance and release. With each incantation, the woods trembled, and the well became a portal between worlds. As the final words left my lips, a brilliant light enveloped the Whispering Woods. The spirits, released from their spectral shackles, ascended like ethereal fireflies, their essence merging with the autumn breeze. The voices faded, replaced by a serene silence that settled over the woods. The once haunting landscape transformed into a haven of tranquility. The trees, no longer looming with a sense of melancholy, stood tall as guardians of a sacred secret. The well, now clear and reflective, mirrored the azure sky above. With a sense of accomplishment and a tinge of sadness, I left the Whispering Woods behind. As I emerged into the outskirts of the town, the leaves rustled a farewell, a soft acknowledgement from the spirits I had set free. Years have passed since that haunting encounter, and the Whispering Woods remain a place of mystery and reverence in my memories. The whispers, once filled with sorrow, now serve as a reminder of a journey that transcended the boundaries of the living and the spectral, a tale etched in the heart of the autumn woods. In the heart of the town, shadowed by looming trees, stood the ominous remnants of the Oak Ridge Asylum, an edifice to nightmares that whispered tales of forgotten screams. Intrigued by its chilling history, I, against all rationality, decided to explore the decaying corridors that held secrets untold. The moment my foot stepped onto the overgrown path leading to the asylum, a chill ran down my spine. The air was thick with a heavy silence that seemed to carry the weight of countless tortured whispers. Graffiti-covered walls greeted me as I approached the entrance, a testament to the asylum's dark allure. As the creaky door swung open, a gust of stale air enveloped me, a cocktail of mildew, decay, and the residual despair of those long gone. I flicked on my flashlight, the feeble beam cutting through the oppressive darkness that clung to the asylum's every corner. The abandoned hallways stretched before me, the floor coated in a carpet of fallen debris. Paint peeled off the walls like the skin of a leper, revealing glimpses of the asylum's grim past. My heartbeat echoed in my ears as I ventured deeper into the labyrinthine structure. "Who's there?" A disembodied voice echoed through the corridors. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It couldn't be real, just a trick of the wind, I told myself. Yet the unsettling feeling lingered, and the whispers of unseen entities danced in the air. Descending into the bowels of the asylum, I discovered rooms frozen in time. A solitary chair in the middle of a padded cell, a rusted gurney with leather straps that told tales of agony. The air seemed to constrict around me, the weight of the asylum's history pressing on my chest. In one room, I stumbled upon old patient records scattered like leaves. Names, dates, and diagnoses chronicled the descent into madness that once played out within these walls. One name, in particular, caught my eye: Margaret Greenfield, admitted in 1952 for hysteria and delusions. As I read her haunting story, a soft voice whispered, "Help me." It seemed to resonate from the walls themselves, an ethereal plea from a tortured soul. I shuddered, torn between disbelief and an inexplicable urge to uncover the truth. Following the echoes, I found myself in the asylum's basement, a damp, forgotten realm that bore witness to unspeakable horrors. The air grew colder, and a flickering light beckoned from the end of the corridor. With each step, the whispers intensified, forming a symphony of despair. In the flickering light, I glimpsed a figure, Margaret, her ghostly presence flickering like a dying flame. "Help me," she implored, her eyes holding a silent plea. I could feel her pain, her anguish that transcended the boundaries of time. Driven by a mixture of dread and compassion, I searched for clues to Margaret's tragic end. In a forgotten storage room, I discovered a collection of old photographs. One image sent shivers down my spine, an asylum staff photo from 1953. There she was, Margaret, her eyes hollow, surrounded by indifferent faces. I ventured back into the basement, determined to set Margaret free. The whispers guided me to a hidden room, its door concealed behind layers of decay. As I pushed it open, the air seemed to change, as if the very fabric of the asylum held its breath. In the center of the room, I found an old music box, a relic from Margaret's past. As I wound it, a haunting melody filled the air, and the atmosphere shifted. Shadows danced on the walls, and the temperature dropped. Margaret's figure materialized before me, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice a gentle breeze that carried the weight of decades. As the melody faded, so did Margaret, her spirit released from the shackles of the asylum. The moment was bittersweet, a mingling of closure and lingering unease. As I emerged from the forsaken asylum, The heavy silence seemed to lift. The chilling whispers that had haunted me dissipated, and the moon cast its pale glow over the decaying structure. The Oak Ridge Asylum, once a bastion of despair, now stood silent, its secrets buried in the past. Margaret's spirit, freed from the asylum's grip, lingered in my thoughts, a reminder of the thin veil between the living and the spectral. As I walked away from the ominous structure, I couldn't shake the feeling that the whispers of the Oak Ridge Asylum still clung to me, woven into the fabric of my memories. The abandoned corridors may have fallen silent, but the echoes of Margaret's plea lingered, a haunting melody that refused to fade away. Ever since I moved into the long-deserted house of my late great-uncle, strange occurrences had been the bread and butter of my nights. Many nights alone, with the thunderclaps echoing across the dark skies, the house seemed to take on a life of its own. One typical stormy night, I was in the dining room, relishing warm shepherd's pie over a cozy fire. Suddenly, a cold gust of wind extinguished the fire, plunging the room into darkness. "Damn the old windows," I muttered. But as I lit the fire again, the air felt different, thick and foreboding. I glanced round, feeling a sour prickling along my spine. From the corner of my eye, I caught something moving up the stairs. I froze, my blood cold. Cautiously, I picked up a cast iron poker and descended the creaky staircase, each step as if on broken glass. "Who's there?" I had intended to sound stern, but my voice came out more like a hoarse whisper. No response. But in the dreadful silence, I heard an ethereal humming. I followed the sound to my uncle's untouched office at the end of the hallway, where antiquated maps and dust-cloaked books laid. My hand trembled as I reached for the brass handle. Pushing the door open, a rush of cold air embraced me, swirling ancient dust around. Paintings peered down melancholically, and the pungent odor of old paper filled the room. But what stood out most was a mirror on the back wall, reflecting an unending abyss within its age-worn frame. I found myself drawn to it, barely noticing the sorrowful figure that now stared from the reflection. It was a young woman with locks of white hair cascading over her frail shoulders. Her sapphire eyes, brimming with sadness, contrasted against her deathly pale skin. I recoiled in horror as realization hit me. "Help me, Charles," she implored, her face distorted with unspoken anguish. Shivers coursed down my spine, shaking me to my very core. Why? Who? I found words sinking into oblivion. The figure's eyes pleaded with despair, frightening yet alluring. "Sophia, your Uncle Harold wished to save me, but," she began, but her voice faded into a distant echo. Her ethereal image dissolved into silver mist and disappeared, leaving behind oppressive silence. Sweat trickled down my face, my heart pounded against my ribcage. Exhausted, I stumbled back, crashing into the desk, scattering dry papers in my wake. Among them, a diary. My uncle's diary. A sense of urgency gripped me as I opened it. His handwriting narrated a heartbreaking truth. Sophia, a name woven into the tales of local folklore. A maiden who had taken her life for love, forever trapped in the ether. My great-uncle had been trying to break her curse, to set her free, but had run out of time. It was now on my shoulders to face this terrifying reality. My quiet life had now become a gothic tale of sorrow, an eerie heritage unfurling. The house seemed more alive than ever, humming with ancient bindings, tales of love and loss echoing through the crevices of the old wood. As the storm outside raged on, I realized a truth. I was utterly, dreadfully alone. Yet, I was far from being alone at all. Every nightfall carried an innate mix of tranquility and loneliness for me ever since I found myself enveloped in the solitude of my grandparents' ancient farmhouse. The monotonous chirpings of crickets were my only companions in the dusk. The house groaned under the burden of secrets carried over from countless yesteryears. One evening, The disturbance was inexplicable. Random gusts invaded my home, causing loose window panes to rattle. A yellow note trembled on the antique coffee table, a cryptic message in my grandfather's swooping handwriting. Avoid the cellar. Not all that sleep should be awakened. Curiosity has never been a trait I could resist. Drawn towards the hidden mysteries, I armed myself with an old LED torch, my valiant steed against the ensuing dark. Reaching the cellar's threshold, I was greeted by an eerie silence. I opened the door tentatively. A chilling breeze swept across, causing the torchlight to flicker disturbingly against the bleak stone walls. The room descended into darkness. Perfect time for the batteries to die, I grumbled, fumbling for my phone. I switched on its flashlight, and my heart froze. Standing there in the heart of that chilling cold was an ethereal figure, glowing softly in the white light. Dressed in period attire, her face was hidden behind a curtain of loose, ebony hair. "Who are you?" I stammered, struggling to hold my fear in check. A voice emanated, light as gossamer, but carrying an undeniable force. "A spirit condemned to roam these forsaken boundaries, left by your grandfather untended." Why? What do you want from me?" The words stumbled out of my trembling lips. "Freedom," she echoed, her voice nothing more than a grief-stricken whisper. As she moved closer, her bone-chilling touch, colder than the most ruthless winter, brushed by my arm. Shivers rushed up my spine, fear trying to grapple my rationality. A calm before the storm swept over, and an irresistible urge to assist this forsaken spirit became my singular focus. A flurry of questions engulfed me, along with an almost irrational fear dictating my pulse. My mysterious visits to the cellar continued. Each encounter was spectral and filled with dread. My spine remembered her chill, my ears her mournful whispers, and my mind the grim tales of a time bygone. The hallucination was a question. Was it real? One fateful night, the spirit offered her salvation, a demise ceremony left incomplete by my grandfather. A choir of emotion poured from her, her words ringing my heart. "Perform the rite, set me free." My heart plummeted to my stomach as I muttered the incantations. My voice trembled as I passed through each strange and menacing syllable. My blood chilled when, at the last word, the spirit wailed out her suffering, her specter dissolving into the cold air around us. And then, silence. I was alone. Sweat poured from my brow. My chest was tight with exhaustion. Did it work? Fear, relief, and uncertainty swirled within me as I left the cellar, leaving behind only echoes of a presence and a story too scary to be oft-repeated. It changed me, that lonely stay at my grandparents' farmhouse. I found solace in solitude, a friendship with the unusual, and an unsettling certainty. Never alone were we, even in the loneliest of homes. I remained a guest in their spectral world, living a truth that coexisted on the edge of our understanding of life and the hereafter. In the self-constructed fortress of my lonely home, I discovered a truth scarier than fiction. Fear weaved its essence into the foundation of my home, lurking in every shadow and whispering through each gust of wind. The house was no longer just bricks filled with my solitude. The spectral resident had left her mark, rendering me forever a prisoner in my own home. In the heart of the night, I found myself in solitude in my rustic house, lodged deep in the rural outback. For reasons I could not articulate, a chill slipped down my spine. A storm was brewing outside, and the intermittent flashes of lightning threw exaggerated shadows dancing across my room. I could hear the wind howl, like distressed spirits mourning departed love. As I sat huddled on my worn-out couch, and wrapped in a threadbare throw, a book lay unread in my hands. My eyes strained to follow the lines on the page, but my mind was as restless as the wind outside. Images of beasts and monsters paraded my thoughts, as if sketched in charcoal against an overcast sky. I shook my head and chastised myself. Get a hold of yourself. They're just stories. Suddenly, the lights fluttered, playful sprites vying for attention, and extinguished. Everything was swallowed into an abyss, save for the sporadic flashes of lightning that sliced the darkness. My pulse quickened. The silence was overpowering. "You're just being a baby," I chided myself. With shaking hands, I reached for the flashlight lying on the table. Its yellow halo trembled as I walked around the house, checking if the currents of wind had somehow blown open a window or door. But everything was as it should be. "It's just the storm," I repeated to myself, more for comfort than conviction. On my way back to the living room, a dull thud made me freeze. The sound echoed from upstairs. Trepidation gripped me. Could it be an intruder, or worse, one of the sinister creatures from my lurking imagination? "No, it's probably just something that fell due to the drought," I said to calm my racing heart. But curiosity, a perverse and tantalizing imp, pushed me forward. Each step towards the staircase creaked ominously under my weight, the old house bearing its timbered bones. I began ascending, the flashlight casting eerie phantoms on the wooden walls. Halfway up, there was another thud, more distinct this time. A shiver shot through me. I wanted to turn around, flee to the safety of the living room, or maybe the outside, anywhere but here. But my feet carried me upwards, tricked by intrigue and stubborn pride. I reached the landing, the darkness dense and suffocating. The beam of my flashlight cut through it like a wavy yellow dagger. As I approached the source of the sound, a spare bedroom rarely used, a flicker of movement caught the corner of my eyes. I swung the flashlight around, its beam revealing nothing but empty space. Bracing myself, I pushed the bedroom door, revealing a room shrouded in gloomy shadows. My heart pounded in my ears as I stepped in. The room had a damp, clinging smell of disuse. There, lying on the floor, was a fallen portrait, my reflection staring back at me from the shattered glass. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding and laughed. All this for an old family portrait. Why are you such a scaredy cat? Turning to leave the room, a glint in the corner of the room caught my attention. A tall antique mirror stood, its surface smooth and undisturbed, reflecting the room. As I gazed into the mirror, a jolt of fear ran through me. The reflection in the mirror wasn't mine. A ghastly figure stared back, its eyes hollow and mouth agape in a silent scream. I felt my blood turn to ice. The world tumbled around me, and everything went black. In this chilling silence, alone at home, I learned a truth more terrifying than any tale. Sometimes our darkest fears are not the product of our imagination, but a reality waiting to be unveiled. The darkness isn't just outside, but it's within our own solitude, revealing awakening horrors we dread to face. I've never been a big fan of being alone, but on that overcast evening, circumstances left me by myself. With the first chilly gust, the season was giving birth to autumn, making the trees weep for lost leaves. My parents were visiting my relatives a few towns over, and my siblings were away at college. It was just me, our dog Jupiter, and the old creaky single-story house that had stood the test of time. To keep myself busy and push away that gnawing fear, I decided to fix a hot meal. As I diced vegetables, the wind whistled through the drafty windows, mirroring the solitude outside and inside me. Just as I finished eating, a sudden power outage plunged me into darkness. My heart pounded in my chest like a wild drum as I groped to find my phone, its light my only source of sanity. By the glow, I hurried to light candles, their flickering shadows dancing ominously against the living room walls. That familiar environment, now rendered ambiguous and chilling, made me shudder. Suddenly, from upstairs, I heard a thud, a distinct noise that was louder and heavier than the natural noises of the house. Probably just an old pile of books falling over. I tried to reason, but my trembling hands betrayed me. Jupiter, too, seemed to sense something. He stood at the bottom of the stairs, hair raised, a low growl rumbling in his throat. "All right, boy. There's nothing there," I attempted to reassure him and myself. Gathering my courage, I picked up a candle, and started climbing the stairs. Each step creaked beneath my weight, echoing through the eerily silent house. As I reached the landing, I heard a faint scratching sound, just a few feet away from the storage room door. An icy shiver ran down my spine, my breath held tight in the cage of my chest. I peeked through the slightly ajar door. Shadows danced upon the walls. There was movement. A distant form lurked amongst the stacked boxes. "Who's there?" My voice quivered, barely louder than a whisper. No response. Summoning every ounce of bravery, I pushed open the door. As light pierced the room, the shadowy figure disappeared. There was nothing there but the boxes of old family souvenirs, a nuance of nostalgia in an otherwise terror-ridden night. Feeling relieved but still on edge, I returned downstairs and made a beeline to the lounge. Just as I was settling down, tapping into the limited internet on my phone, Jupiter started to growl again, this time towards the kitchen. "Enough, Jupiter. There's nothing." Before I could finish, I heard it, glass shattering from the kitchen. This time, it wasn't an unsettling sound. It was a proclamation of presence, a message that something, or someone, was there. Paralyzed by fear, I remembered my dad's baseball bat in the hallway closet. Slowly, painstakingly, I crept to the closet, retrieved the bat, and moved towards the kitchen. Jupiter was beside me, his growls quiet now, but tense and alert. Reaching the kitchen doorway, I saw the window smashed. Shivering with fear and cold, I stood there, bat in hand. Looking outside, it was pitch black and silent. Nothing but bare trees and the unsettling view of the forest at the edge of our property. What in the world is happening? I let out a shaky breath. Suddenly, in my peripheral vision, I saw a sensation of movement from the forest. However, as soon as I focused, everything fell silent and still once again. Overwhelmed, I scrambled back to the living room, bat in one hand, phone in the other, ready to dial 911. Just as I was about to press call, the lights abruptly flickered back to life, banishing the terrifying shadows. I sat frozen, my heart pounding against my rib cage, sweat pouring down my brows, waiting for the next jarring sound. However, no sounds came. As moments turned into hours, my courage grew. Dawn broke, erasing the last traces of my eerie night. The morning light painted the world in a palette of normality that belied the terror of the hours before. When my parents arrived a few hours later, they found the shattered window, my fearful tale, and my sanity hanging by a thread. Never again did they leave me alone overnight. Until this day, every odd noise in the night or a flicker in the lights sends chills down my spine, reminding me of the time I was all alone in our old house, sharing the darkness with an unseen terror. One summer evening in mid-August, I found myself home alone. My parents had decided to go on an impromptu date. The weather was lovely, and they'd been forced to remain cooped up for so long due to their work schedules. It would be good for them, I thought. "Just remember to shut all the windows, honey," my mom had called back at me as my dad maneuvered their old bus around the narrow gravel path leading away from our house. I promised to, and watched them disappear into the arms of the starlit night. I had always loved the eerie calm of the house when left alone, but that night was different. An undeniable, suffocating veil of darkness seemed to wrap itself around me with the falling dusk. I tried to ignore it, settling down to have dinner, but the deep sense of foreboding loitered in the back of my mind, like an unwelcome guest. A gust of wind slammed the back door shut, making me jump. I decided to follow through with my promise and commenced my rounds of checking the windows. The moon was unusually bright that night. It shed an otherworldly glow on our garden as I walked from window to window, securing each one. I had just started on the last window in the living room when a shadow flickered across the moonlit curtains. My blood ran cold and my heart pounded in my chest. I didn't dare to look outside, but the house was infamous in the neighborhood for its long-standing history of unusual sightings and strange noises. Gravity seemed to be holding me tight as I forced my body to turn, and my eyes landed at the figure at the garden's edge. It was tall, slender, and uncannily out of place. I blinked, hoping it was just my imagination. It wasn't. For a moment, it just stood there, watching me, its posture oddly static and too still against the dancing trees in the wind. While I couldn't discern its face, I felt a chill run down my spine, an instinctual response signaling danger. My mind turned to my parents' words. They always chided me for my lavish use of horror fiction. "Reality isn't a Stephen King novel, kiddo," my father would joke. But right now, his words brought no comfort. Unsettlingly, the figure began to move towards me, each step consistent and deliberate. A fog of fear enclosed me. That's when I decided to get away and dialed 911. I didn't know if they would believe me, but I remember praying they would. 911, what's your emergency?" the operator asked. I stammered out my situation in broken sentences, struggling to breathe properly. I was asked to stay on the line and lock all entry points. My hand shook as I scrambled to lock the doors, the figure ominously closer now. As I retreated to my room and moved the dresser against the door, the front door creaked open. I held my breath, just barely catching the operator's voice on the phone. "Police will be there in 5 minutes." Each second stretched into an eternity as I hid in the corner of my room, my view of the corridor through the keyhole. The figure moved fluidly, casting elongated shadows with the moonlight at its back. This, the most frightening night of my life, ended abruptly when the siren screamed through the silence. The figure halted, its head turning towards the door before it vanished into thin air. The police found no signs of breaking in, only a shell-shocked teenager clutching a phone. Now when I sit alone, I don't find the airy calm but an echo of that night. Amid the strain of normalcy returning, I keep two things close: a memory of an intruder from beyond, and a slice of horror I'll remember to my grave. Ever since, I never stay alone at home after dark. It all started on Thanksgiving. Not just any Thanksgiving, but the coldest one in a long time. We were all at my grandma's house. Me, my brother Mikey, cousins Jenny and Danny, Aunt Lisa, and of course Grandma. We were waiting for Dad, who was set to arrive later because of his work. I love Grandma's house, but there's a weird old shed in the backyard where Grandma always keeps everything we're not supposed to touch. She's real serious about it. We even nickname it the Forbidden Shed. We were playing catch in the backyard, waiting for the Thanksgiving turkey to roast. Then the ball went into the Forbidden Shed. I knew I was the one who had to get it. Yeah, I was scared, but I didn't want to look like a pansy in front of Mikey and Jenny. I crept up on the weather-beaten old shed and opened the door, squinting to see in the dark. There it was, our ball next to an old wooden box. As I bent down to pick it up, I knocked the box, and out fell a small, old, leather-bound book. It looked like it'd been sitting there for centuries. Jenny, the nosy one, ran over, snatched the book, and said, "Let's look." "It's in some strange language," she said. "Oh wait, there's something in English here." She cleared her throat and read out, "He who reads aloud to awake, in fear shall quake." Mikey laughed. "Quit it. You're just trying to scare us," he said. But honestly, I was scared. The wind started blowing harder, and the trees seemed to whisper secrets. We went back into the house. The smell of pumpkin pie and roasting turkey was everywhere, but there was a sense of uneasiness in my gut. Something was wrong. As evening came, we gathered around the dinner table, but Dad was still not there. That was odd. He was never this late. Grandma tried to hide her worry, but I could see it in her eyes. Just as we said grace, the lights went out. We heard a roar, like a wild lion, that sent shivers down my spine. Suddenly, doors started slamming, and the house shook. Outside, the wind was howling like a pack of wild wolves. Grandma gasped. The book. She looked so scared, and I'd never seen her scared before. I felt a cold sweat on my forehead. We picked up candles and gathered around Grandma as our only source of life in the utter darkness. What do we do, Grandma? Jenny whimpered, clinging to her. Grandma's face was white as paper. She said, "We've to return the book, read the chant again, but backwards." As the eldest, I was chosen to do it. With a heavy heart, I took the candle and the book and made my way to the shed. It was darker than ever, and the bone-chilling wind wasn't making it easy for me either. Back at the shed, my hands shaking, I read the chant backward. Immediately, there was a deafening silence. The wind stopped, and the scary sounds vanished. The lights flicked back on. Just then, we heard a car pull up. It was Dad. Tears streamed down Grandma's face as she hugged us. We promised to never go into the shed again. It wasn't a normal Thanksgiving, but we were thankful. Thankful that we were together, and most of all, that the terror was over. From then on, no one dared to speak of the forbidden shed and its secret again. Thanksgiving night. My family, as custom dictates, congregated at the grand old house deep in the old part of town. The house, belonging to my cookie and reclusive great-uncle Arthur, was an embodiment of family history, towering proudly with its elaborate carved pumpkins and goblins on the verge of being Christmas elves soon. Unbeknownst to us, an unforgettable, scary story was about to be woven. A story that would drastically alter every family Thanksgiving henceforth. As the scent of roasted turkey and sweet pumpkin pie wafted through the house, the jovial atmosphere was tainted by an inexplicable feeling of unease. Uncle Arthur's frail figure appeared more stooped, his eyes shrouded with fear. The ancient chandelier flickered ominously in the dining room, casting strange shadows on the family portraits. "Welcome, welcome," Arthur murmured, eyes darting towards the darkest corners of the house nervously. I frowned and met eyes with my sister, Emily, who shrugged. Our uncanny family, their eccentricities, and strange traditions were still new to us. We had moved overseas when we were children. Dinner commenced, and amidst the laughter and stories, Uncle Arthur stood, frail hands shaking. "May I have the attention of the family?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The room went instantly quiet. Everyone's attention now turned to the patriarch. A shiver of apprehension trickled down my spine as he began an old family tale, one about the Wailer of Thanksgiving, a vengeful spirit who would rise yearly to seek revenge on our ancestor who had betrayed him. Each word of the tale echoed in the silent room, and as the story took a dark turn, the lights in the room dimmed. Arthur finished the tale with a somber silence, an unspoken dread hanging in the air. The family sat stiff, momentarily paralyzed. Suddenly, the wind outside roared to life, creating ghostly whispers through the trees. A dreadful wail tore through the silence, high and mournful. Lights flickered. Shadows played on the old family portraits. The atmosphere turned cold. "Hey, Arthur, this is some kind of joke, right?" Aunt Marcy stammered, her eyes wide, hands clenched. "No, Marcy," Uncle Arthur replied, a palpable terror in his voice. "The Wailer has come." The old house moaned, the walls popping and cracking around us. My heart pounded as echoes of the Wailer's tormented cries danced through my mind. It's just not possible. I tried to reassure myself, my voice wavering in fear. It felt like ages before the wailing diminished into the cold night, and the fear-ridden atmosphere seemed to withdraw, making way for confusion. We spent the night huddled together, too scared to move, hardly daring to breathe. Morning arrived. The sun's early rays fell upon the faces of exhausted family members. There were no signs of paranormal events from the night before. Even the cold was replaced by a warm, pleasant ambience. Uncle Arthur, however, was nowhere to be found. His bedroom was left undisturbed, and his walking cane lay forgotten next to the now calm fireplace. No footprints, no notes. It was as though he'd vaporized into the thin morning air. While the police were contacted, our family was left to our devices, musing over the events of the last night. The vanishing of Uncle Arthur, the wailing haunting our nightmares. We were submerged in uncertainty. Had the wailer truly visited? Had Arthur become its victim? Despite the warmth of the day, a perpetual frost seemed to settle in my heart. Thanksgiving in our family had acquired a scary past it would never shake off. From that day on, we remembered not just our blessings and joy during Thanksgiving. We also remembered the haunting wail, Arthur's frightened eyes, his mysterious disappearance, and the terrifying Thanksgiving night etched into our family's history. Whether truth or legend, our Thanksgiving was forever storm-touched, a chilling chapter in our family tale. And even as we sat together, digested the turkey and pie, laughter echoing in the dining room, we could not forget the frosty touch of the unseen, the whispers of our past, and the enigmatic end of Uncle Arthur. So now, as I welcome my family to Thanksgiving dinner in the same old house, I can't help but look at the darkest corners of the house, listening to the wind, remembering Uncle Arthur, and wondering if the wailer of Thanksgiving would ever descend on us again. Thanksgiving, a time for family and food and gratitude. But my Thanksgiving tale, it was different. It was a chilling night to remember, one bearing the weight of both horror and enlightenment. I was back in my childhood home, the old farmhouse that stood tall amidst the barren November fields. I'd loved the place as a kid, but coming back as an adult brought a not-so-familiar feeling I didn't quite understand. The creaking wooden floor, the dated wallpaper, it all had an eerie charm now. Before arriving, my sole intention was to cook turkey, to enjoy the stuffing and cranberry sauce, maybe some pumpkin pie, a Norman Rockwell painting come to life. But that was before I discovered the locked basement door. "Why's the basement off limits, Aunt Edna?" I asked during dinner. She paused, a ghastly pallor washing over her face. "It's just old things, dear. You won't find anything useful there," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. Aunt Edna was typically robust, her discomposure unsettling. Later that night, curiosity piqued. I found myself standing before the basement door. I could feel an unnatural chill seeping from beneath, a stunning contrast to the cozy warmth of the home. It seemed as though the basement was calling out to me, whispering tales of forgotten times. With a skeleton key I'd found above the fireplace, I turned the lock. Down the staircase, I walked into palpable darkness, the air dense and cold. The floor was clad in age-old dust and cobwebs hung like melancholy drapes. Among the usual miscellanea, I saw it, an antique mirror. But this mirror, it was different. I could see my reflection, but instead of my cozy sweater and jeans, the me in the mirror wore an old-timey pilgrim's outfit. Jumping back in terror, I stared at the crawling dread in my reflection. "Who are you?" it asked, its voice a hollow echo of mine. I'm Jonathan." "Who are you?" I stammered back, scarcely believing the words escaping my lips. "I am also Jonathan, but from a different time. A time of famine. A brutal winter. 1621. In this nightmarish, reality-bending moment, I was conversing with a Pilgrim-era replica myself. The plausible insanity of the situation gnawed at my sanity. "What do you want from me?" I asked, breath caught in my throat. "I wish to show you something." Suddenly, I was no longer in the basement, but a harsh field surrounded by withering crops and bitter cold. Pilgrim Jonathan stood beside me, pointing towards the hollow eyes of starving people. "Behold, the true face of the first Thanksgiving. We had nothing, yet we were grateful. Can you say the same for your times?" I looked around at the suffering. I felt the biting cold. Emotion welled within me. Fear, sorrow, empathy, all mixed with a dread realization. Awaking with a start, I found myself sprawled on the basement floor. As my eyes darted to the now benign mirror, countless questions cascaded through my unsettled mind. Was it just a dream, a vision, or a grim, otherworldly voyage? Ascending from the basement, I rejoined my family. The laughter, the delicious food, all lay before me in a new light now. A blunt reminder of the stark dichotomy of Thanksgiving's history contrasted against its present emancipation. That bone-chilling encounter remains with me ever since, shaping not just my Thanksgivings, but every day of my existence. A reminder that we live in abundance and how fundamental it is to acknowledge it with gratitude. For there was a time when such luxury was the farthest from reality. As I carry forward with my life, the mirror in the basement remains locked away. But its message, the chilling truth of the first Thanksgiving, echoes on. A scary, but enlightening Thanksgiving story of my own. Thanksgiving is traditionally a time of joy and togetherness. For me, it used to be like this too. Used to, but that changed on a freezing Thanksgiving night back in 2023. My house stood alone on a secluded lane, blanketed by dense evergreens. That year, the evening carried an eerie silence. Snow, deliberately falling, muffled even the wind. As I checked the golden brown turkey in the oven, I felt a wicked sense of apprehension, but dismissed it as holiday jitters. "Everything okay in there?" voiced my wife, Sarah, from the dining room. We were expecting our usual crowd, our 2 kids, their spouses, and our 4 charming grandchildren. "Just fine, love," I replied, planting a forced smile on my face. The hammering of my heart was inexplicably strong. Anxiety twisted my insides, but I convinced myself it was nothing more than the stress of hosting. Our guests arrived, cutting through the gloomy weather with their boisterous cheer, and for a brief moment, the fear ebbed away. Before long, we were all exchanging stories and carving into the delectable spread of traditional Thanksgiving delights. Midway through the evening, the power blinked out. The light drizzle outside had taken a vicious turn into a full-blown blizzard. Gales wailed and groaned, lashing at our confines as darkness crept in around us. The grandchildren whimpered in the sudden gloom. "I'll get the generator started," I said, making my way toward the garage. But when I wrenched open the door, I froze. Boot-printed snow trailed into the shadows of the garage. But we were all inside before the blizzard. Who could have trespassed? I felt a chill down my spine, not from the biting winds but rising fear. Brushing it off as a possible misinterpretation, I followed the tracks. As I reached the generator, I found it open, wires ripped out and scattered haphazardly. Sabotage. The sense of dread I felt earlier surged back, threatening to consume me. I rushed back to the house, locking the doors behind me. The sight that awaited me in the living room curdled my blood. All the laughter had drained away. Sarah stood frozen, her face white as the storm outside, staring at the TV which flickered back to life, powered by its internal backup battery. On the screen was a live feed of us, our every move being broadcast from various corners of our home. Our sanctuary had been violated. Someone had been watching, waiting. "We need to leave," I hissed, but it was already too late. The pounding commenced, echoing through the house, a bone-chilling staccato that silenced even the blizzard. The windows fogged up, inscriptions scribbled in the condensation. "Happy Thanksgiving, don't let me in." The room was intense with terror. The children whimpered, huddled close to their parents, their innocence replaced with dread. We were not alone. "I'm calling the police," said my son-in-law John, but his phone met only static. The landline just echoed a dreadful, hollow tone. We were cut off from the world. The pounding stopped abruptly. The resulting silence was deafening. Then the whispering started. It was everywhere, ruthlessly invading our minds. It begged, in rasping breaths, "Let me in, it's cold outside." We spent the night huddled together in the living room, whispering haunting us. At dawn, as the storm retreated, the whispering ceased. Our night of horror ended with the arrival of the police. They found no perpetrator, no cameras, just a terrified family. No one outside believed our story. Thanksgiving stress, they said, playing tricks with your mind. But we know what we heard, what we saw. That Thanksgiving changed everything. The joy and togetherness replaced by terror and suspicion. That eerie Thanksgiving night we realized we were never really alone. And ever since, every knock sends a shiver down our spines. Thanksgiving had always been my favorite holiday. The savory sense of roasting turkey, sweet pies, and my family's loving chatter. But that particular year, our gathering at the old family farmhouse in rural Vermont witnessed events which surpassed any supernatural tale one might pass in hushed tones around a campfire. As tradition would dictate, a vivacious feast was held at our ancestral home. When I first stepped through the creaky wooden doors, my uncle's loud laughter, my aunt's mirthful stories, and the familiar feeling of belonging welcomed me. A warm glow bathed the whole room, and my grandmother's antique chandelier cast splintered rainbows on the worn mahogany floor. After a hearty dinner and delightful conversation, a peculiar gust of wind grumbled outside, rattling the windows. Our laughter stilled as we stole glances at the inky night beyond. The weather shifted fast in those parts, but this felt different, almost unnatural. My cousin, Tim, loved all things supernatural and breaking awkward moments, chimed in. Did you guys ever hear the story of the wailing widow who haunts this homestead on Thanksgiving night? We exchanged doubtful glances. Tim, quit being dramatic, my sister said, though the uneasiness in her voice suggested she didn't quite believe in her casual dismissal. Ignoring her, Tim dove right into the tale, describing how, 100 years ago, a lonely widow was so grief-stricken over her husband's death that she wandered into a snowstorm on Thanksgiving and perished. Her spirit supposedly roams, seeking company on this cold holiday, crying out in loneliness. As the story ended, a chilling wail echoed outside. Everyone fell silent. Through the frosted window panes, a svelte silhouette materialized against the swirling snow. Goosebumps prickled along my nape, a primal fear gripping me. What was that? Whispered my younger brother. His eyes were wide, and he clutched his stuffed bear. We huddled closer together, watching as the figure ambled uncomfortably closer. Bright lightning illuminated her form. A woman in antique clothing, her face obscured by a frost-tinted veil. She seemed to weep, and with each sorrow-filled groan, the house creaked in sadness. Maybe we should invite her in, my grandmother suggested infamously, her tired eyes filled with empathy, reflecting the old-world superstitions she grew up with. But the air became electric with our protests. In all this, I found myself compelled towards the door. My heart pounded, but I also felt a peculiar sympathy for our spectral visitor. Ignoring the pleas of my relatives, I reached towards the door, and instantly, a gust of frigid wind slammed it open. The wailing wind carried her inside. She stood in the threshold, her intense frozen stare focusing on me. I could hear an unspoken plea in her wailing, a deep yearning for something lost. This spectral manifestation sought only solace. Overwhelmed by compassion, yet petrified, I extended my hand towards her. But just as quickly, she vanished, leaving behind an unnatural cold and silence that echoed within the filigree wallpaper. After that night, Thanksgiving was never the same. There was a solemn quality to it, a respect for the stories of old and the spirits who may roam in the wind and snow. The fear in our hearts was replaced by understanding and compassion. The wailing widow had lost her home, but every Thanksgiving, as our family gathers, we ensure she's remembered, recognized. We tell her tale. We quieten to listen to her cries in the wind. By acknowledging her, we've learned a new empathy for the lonely and the lost. The ghost in our story is no longer an unimaginable fear, but a part of our family's complex tapestry. I'm John. I work as a medical examiner in Atlanta. a job you might describe as quiet and ordinary. In my world, the dead hold no secrets, and in the stillness of the city morgue, life's worst mysteries are distilled into reports and paperwork. But there's one night I can't explain, and every time I think about it, a chill slides down my spine. The sky was ugly that night, with a storm twisting the city skyline into a mass of rain and shadows. I had just finished an autopsy when a knock came at the door. It was Officer Paul, a local beat cop, carrying the newest resident of my cold domain. A John Doe, found in the alleys, browned according to preliminary on-scene checks. "This one feels off, John," Paul said before leaving. "No ID, no witnesses, just that creepy pendant around his neck. Be careful." His words lingered even when his footfalls receded into the storm. I took a look at the body, arranged on the steel table in front of me. It was a man, surely not more than 25, his face frozen in the peaceful lullaby of death's embrace. Around his neck was a pendant, an odd symbol etched into it. I had an odd pang of fear as I held it. Shaking off the feeling, I began my work. A loud slam echoed through the morgue as the lights flickered and went out. I fumbled for the flashlight on my table, clicking it on and playing it across the room. The whispers began then. "John." They lilted, gusting around the room like a breeze, raising the hairs on my neck. I jerked around, but the room was empty. Then, a scream. My eyes shot back to the table. To this day, I don't know if it was fear playing tricks, but I'll swear the corpse had twisted, its eyes wide open, staring at me. In the flashlight's beam, those dead eyes had a strange gleam to them. As I recoiled in dread, I could only watch as the body contorted on the table, jerking as though attacked by invisible hands. My blood ran cold as I backed away towards the door. Panic gripped me as I fumbled with the handle, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. Doom. The whisper turned into hundreds, surrounding me. The room twisted around me, shadowy figures contorted in the flashlight's beam. "Doom," the voice repeated, closer, right in my ear, the smell of decay filling my senses. I retched, my skin crawling as those icy eyes bored into me. Clasping my hands over my ears, I curled on the floor as my world became a spiraling pit of terror. Just when I could take no more, the morning light penetrated the grimy morgue windows, and the whole episode unraveled as quickly as it started. The lights flickered back on, the silence returning to its peaceful, isolating thickness. John Doe was back on his table, all signs of his unnatural animation gone. Every noise makes me jerk now. Every shadow in the morgue holds a sinister presence. I've tried to rationalize it, tried to convince myself it was fatigue, or that I hallucinated that phantom-filled horror. But the icy dread when I crossed that John Doe's table, the chill that grabs hold of me in the silence of my office, they're all too real. Even now, when I perform an autopsy, I shudder, dreading what secrets the hollow skulls may unfold. My morgue hides a spectral secret, its walls echoing a horror that lingers after the dead. Now, when I punch out each night, I leave with a fervent hope that the dead remain at peace and that I never have to cross paths with my doom in the silent depths of the morgue again. I'd always found a melancholic harmony in the solitude of the morgue, but one night shattered my peace. It was a frost-bitten winter night, the darkness spreading its inky cloak over the city of Austin. On this particular night, I was expecting the arrival of a John Doe, found dead under strange circumstances in a seedy end of town. Officer Ryan, a grizzled veteran, came in dragging his latest find. Throwing a concerned glance my way, he lifted the body bag onto the examination table. "Be careful with this one, Doc." Ryan's voice was hushed, but I could hear the trepidation. His eyes glinted in the stereo light of the morgue as he pointed towards a bizarre pendant hanging from John Doe's neck. It was an odd glyph, one I'd never seen before. After Ryan left, I began my work, pulling off the white sheet revealing a man in his mid-30s with a gaunt appearance and a peculiar cyanotic pallor that wasn't just attributable to death. seeming more like an aftereffect of extreme fear. Then, with a sudden sputter, the lights shut off, leaving only the soft glow of my emergency light rendering long throwing shadows that danced along the tiled floors and bleached walls. In the enshrouding darkness, a whisper tiptoed through the air, so faint it was as though someone was exhaling words. "Free us." I froze, the cold suddenly leaching into the marrow of my bones. The whisper was there again, louder this time, pinpricks of fear blossoming into a full-blown dread. I turned towards the source of the sound. I couldn't believe my eyes. The corpse's chest was heaving, as if it was gasping for air. Its eyes snapped open, and they were not the vacant eyes of a dead man. They had a terrifying clarity. "Free us." The voice echoed as if emanating from the body itself. In a gut-clenching moment of terror, icy fear clutched my heart. Stumbling back, I knocked over a tray of my tools, the clang echoing in the silent morgue. I fumbled towards the door, my hand shaking as I tried to turn the knob. My instincts were thundering in my ears to get out. I tugged harder, but the door wouldn't budge. Trapped with a talking corpse, the chilling prospects played out in my mind. Before I could try to make sense of anything, the corpse's body started writhing, the sight taking my breath away. I pressed back against the door as it jerked violently, the table underneath it rattling ominously. "Free us." The room darkened further, the whispering becoming a cyclone of hysteria. I fought the urge to scream, dread squeezing my lungs. Without warning, the paralyzing torment ceased as dawn's first light filtered through the small window of the morgue. The corpse was unmoving, back to its peaceful state, as if nothing had happened. The once locked door creaked open, freed from its invisible barricade, as I stumbled out into the corridor, gasping for air. The terror of that night haunts me still. My morgue, once my sanctuary, is a constant reminder of that chilling encounter. The whispering voice, the violent convulsions, the fear engendered within me, they all lurk in the shadows and nooks of the morgue, itching to creep out if provoked. I cannot explain what unfolded that night, neither can I forget it, and there's nothing I dread more than hearing those whispers again. The dead were meant to be silent, and I hope they remain so, because in the quiet corners of my morgue, fear whispers, "Free us." I work at a morgue in the sleepy town of Rosemead. It's the kind of place where everyone knows each other, where the only disturbance happens when old Bill forgets to silence his car horn at 6 a.m. So you can imagine how shocked we were when we got a call about a body found in the old abandoned house at the end of Maple Street. It was late, around midnight when the call came in. I was on night duty and decided to stick around until the body arrived. Given how small our town is, we barely had any bodies coming in. And when we did, there was usually a familiar face. Heart attacks, illness, you get the picture. But this one, folks said he was a drifter who'd wandered into town. Officer Lowe, a burly, good-natured man who'd been in the force since I was in kindergarten, came in carrying the body. "Mike," he told me, "there's something strange about this one. No apparent wounds, no signs of a struggle, but he's got this odd pendant around his neck." The pendant was strange, all right, made of a dark, metallic material resembling obsidian. It was etched with unfamiliar symbols that set an ominous tone. Officer Lowe left. I was alone in the morgue with the drifter. I decided to start with the external examination. His face was marked by a terror I hadn't seen before. On unbuttoning his shirt, I found his skin was icy, cold even by a dead man's standards. Then the lights flickered off. Startled, I reached for my flashlight, breaking the eerie silence. I was met with the chilling hum of the backup generator and the red glow from its emergency light. Suddenly, a whisper curled through the room like fog sliding under a doorway. It was so faint that I thought I'd imagined it until I heard it again. "Help." A chill ran down my spine. The voice seemed to come from the body on the table. His eyes were open, the dull look of death replaced with what seemed like pleading desperation. Help me. Surging terror gripped me. I watched in horror as the drifter began to writhe on the table, the metallic clang of his movements echoing ominously through the room. My heart pounded in my chest as if trying to break free. I backed away, stumbling against a tray of instruments. Their crash sounded deafening in the silence. I fell to the floor, my breath coming out in choked gasps. No escape, the voice echoed, sounding different again, as if it was no longer coming from the body, but reverberating around the room. Trying to muffle my panicked breathing, I scrambled towards the door. I twisted the knob, pulled, but it wouldn't budge. I pushed against it with all the strength fear could summon, to no avail. Then, as dawn's first light streamed through the tiny window, everything stopped. The body lay still on the table. Its terror-filled eyes were closed again, and the strange pendant once again a simple piece of metal. Somehow, the door swung open easily. Cool morning air rushed in as I stumbled out of the morgue and into the sunlight. The fear that had held me captive gradually loosened its grip. That terrifying night changed everything. The morgue, my refuge of solace, turned into a house of fear for me. I keep expecting to hear that voice again, each echo in the cold, sterile room sending chills running down my spine. Thus, each night I spend there is a test of courage. They say the only thing to fear is fear itself. I say the only thing to fear is the whispering dead. My nights at the morgue had always been quiet, the silence broken only by resounding echoes of metallic sliders, signaling the end of each investigation. Nestled in a corner of a small town, mine was a lonely occupation. But I had always taken my job as a medical examiner seriously, each case bringing closure for grieving families. But one dreary November night, my mundane routine was shredded to pieces, leaving me racked with unease that I can still taste, even after several years. I was startled by the thunderous knock at midnight. Officer Hendricks, his face a silhouette under the moonlight, brought in the lifeless form of a young girl. Her name's Emily Westwood, 17. He grimaced, taking off his hat as a mark of respect. Clearing his throat, he continued, suspected OD, but no evidence to suggest. She was found on the outskirts of town. It's a pity. Emily's body, pristine and devoid of visible injuries, lay on my examination table. Her wide-open eyes held an eerie intensity that sent invisible fingers of unease skating up my spine. I hated to admit, but the vibe of that room was unlike any other. Hours bullet into each other as I began the autopsy. A peculiar sense of foreboding put my already heightened instincts into overdrive as I searched for a cause of death. The exceptionality of that night unfolded further when the lights flickered and died, plunging the already creepy morgue into a realm of darkness. Counting to 10, I waited for the backup generator, but it didn't kick in. Cursing under my breath, I fumbled around for a flashlight. When I switched on, I was stunned by the sight before me. Emily, not in her lifeless form, but standing rigidly as though alive. Her ash-blonde hair cascaded around a face now blanched of any color, cheeks streaked with fresh tears. In the initial shock, I stepped back, tripping over my own shock. "Are you, Emily?" My voice trembled, while I tried to comprehend the incomprehensible. She nodded and spoke, her voice a mere whisper that sliced through my stupor. I was murdered. Even as my racing heart protested against that claim, I couldn't tear my eyes from her spectral form. "By who, Emily?" I asked, already dreading her answer. "Brian Todd. He was my boyfriend," she divulged, her voice unexpectedly firm. "We fought. He didn't mean to, but he did." She described the night of her death. The argument instigated by jealousy, harmful words escalating to physical confrontation. I could almost smell the intoxicating scent of her fear, mixed with fresh earth and rain as she recounted her last moments. Her icy touch on my wrist was a jolt of reality. By the time she finished her story, her body had disappeared from the table. That only made her account eerier, more undeniable. The eeriness of what had transpired in this cold room was too real, too vivid. With sunrise, I found myself alone in the morgue. Emily's ghostly presence was gone, evaporated into thin air just as suddenly as it appeared. Armed with her confession, I rushed to Officer Hendricks, who, much to my surprise, didn't dismiss my story. And though he was skeptical at first, the subsequent confession from a guilt-addled Brian Todd and the post-mortem results convinced him. We found justice for Emily. That night remains etched into my soul, a haunting memory that forever altered how I perceive my chosen profession, and more prominently, the eerie morgue. Life, death, and the spectral realm in between. A realm that I breached during one unforgettable, chilling November night, changing the rhythm of this lone morgue forever. My life as a coroner in the small town of Barrington had always been surrounded by an inherent sense of unsettling quiet. My office, located in the basement of the rundown two-story municipal building, was a cold, relentless reminder of life's impermanence. It was not the dead that unsettled me, but the prospect of untold stories whispering in the echo void of their silence. This story, however, breathes life into my fear. It was a frigid night in mid-December, the soft whisper of snowfall blanketing the town's sleepy demeanor. Mary Beth, the senior officer, had called me into an evening shift for an unexpected case. "2 John Does found near Gravesend," she rumbled over the phone, the sadness undisguised in her usually stoic voice. The prospect of more unclaimed bodies added a somber note to my evening. Descending into my icy work domain was a routine I had come to find comforting in its familiarity. My world shrank into a bubble of fluorescent lighting, cold metallic counters, and the solitude of my task at hand. But that night, everything felt unnaturally askew. Pulling the drape from the first body, a wave of a strong metallic scent hit me, more intense than the stale whiffs that floated in the autopsy room regularly. This was different, thick with an edge of deep unease. My hands trembled as I went through the familiar steps of the autopsy, cold sweat forming on my brow. Each suture, every incision felt like an intrusive violation on the unnaturally cold, hardened skin. The usual detachment I could maintain began to dissolve, leaving me shaking with an odd sense of dread. Just as I finished cataloging the findings of the first John Doe, the lights in the basement flickered ominously. A low hum filled the room, and almost instinctively, I turned towards the darkened corner of the room. Despite the flickering fluorescent light, the room seemed to harbor an unnatural darkness that made my heart stutter in trepidation. From the deep corners of the room, a low cough echoed through the silence, a hoarse, hollow sound. The papers on my desk fluttered as a cold draft swept through the room, instantly plunging it into an almost timeless standstill. "Who's there?" I called out, the tremor in my voice belying my apprehension. A tall figure materialized from the shadows, held together by the weak tendrils of the flickering light. "Help us," he implored, his voice echoing from far away. I blinked in disbelief, my blood running cold as the figure mirrored the lifeless body on my examination table. My heart pounded in my chest, each word he spoke unfolding a grim tale of their demise. They were drifters who'd hitched a ride on the wrong truck, led into the wilderness, and dispatched with brutal promptness. Their bodies were discarded, their stories left untold. Until now. As the spectral figure's words tailed off, a second figure emerged from the dark, identical to the second John Doe who still lay untouched on my other table. He was silent, yet his hollow eyes spoke volumes, blinking in distress, confirming the earlier narrative. When the spectral figures faded with the rising sun, leaving me alone in the chilling silence of the basement, I rushed up the stairs and relayed the information to Mary Beth. Her initial disbelief gave way to somber resolution as she picked up the phone to report the details. The autopsies of the two later confirmed the stories of their spectral doubles, unsheathing their path to an unfortunate end, and ultimately leading to the arrest of a trucker from out of town. The morgue in Barrington, especially its unnerving basement, remains a stage for the untold stories of the unfortunate souls arriving on its metallic tables. My duty became more than just scientific investigation. I became a medium, a conduit between the living and the dead, and my solitude became the whispers of the untold stories seeking justice. While the morgue under Barrington continues to whisper tales in its unique cryptic tongue, the spectral incidents that one chilling December night changed my work and my life forever. It was no longer a familiar comfort. It was a haunting victim of unvoiced stories. The shiver that slides down your spine when you descend the steps into the basement is not just the chill of the room, it's the reminder of the spectral story that began and ended there.